The phone rang at 2 a.m. in Al Capone's mansion. On the other end was a voice he never expected to hear, the wife of the man who had tried to destroy him. Chicago, February 1932. The winter had been brutal that year, the kind that kills the weak and tests the strong. In a small apartment on the north side, 3 children were sleeping in one bed, sharing what little warmth they could find. Their mother sat at the kitchen table, staring at a telephone number she had sworn she would never dial. Vincent "the Knife" Romano was dead. The man who had spent 5 years trying to bring down Al Capone, who had declared war on everything Capone built, who had sworn to see him destroyed, was gone. And his family was about to lose everything. By dawn, Capone would make a decision that proved true. Strength isn't about crushing your enemies. It's about knowing when to save them. This is a Chicago story, the kind that could only happen in that era, when honor still meant something, when enemies could become family, and when mercy was the most dangerous weapon a man could choose to use. What happened in those early morning hours would change both families forever. It would teach them something about power that no amount of money or fear could ever provide. And it would show that sometimes the greatest victory comes from choosing not to win. To understand what Al Capone did that February night, you need to understand Vincent Romano. And to understand Romano, you need to understand that in Chicago, in the 1,920 seconds and 30 seconds, territory wasn't just about money, it was about survival. Vincent Romano was everything Al Capone wasn't. Where Capone was diplomatic, Romano was aggressive. Where Capone built alliances, Romano preferred intimidation. Where Capone understood that business was about relationships, Romano believed it was about domination. They called him the Knife, not because he used one, though he certainly knew how, but because everything he did was sharp, cutting, designed to wound. He had a thin face, pale eyes, and a smile that never reached beyond his lips. Men feared him not because he was the strongest, but because he was unpredictable. Romano ran the North Side with an iron fist. His territory was smaller than Capone's, but he held it with a ferocity that made even hardened criminals nervous. He didn't just defeat his enemies, he destroyed them. He didn't just win, he humiliated. The war between Capone and Romano began in 1927 over something that, looking back, seems almost trivial: a shipment of Canadian whiskey that both men claimed to have purchased. A misunderstanding that could have been resolved with a conversation became a 5-year blood feud that would define both their lives. But it wasn't really about the whiskey. It was about 2 very different ideas of what power should look like. Capone believed in what he called the organization. Everyone had a place. Everyone had value. Conflicts were resolved through negotiation when possible, violence when necessary, but always with an eye toward long-term stability. He wanted to build something that would last. Romano believed in conquest. Take what you can, hold what you take, crush anyone who challenges you. He didn't want to build an empire. He wanted to win a war. For 5 years, they circled each other like wolves. There were shootings, bombings, betrayals. Good men died because Romano and Capone couldn't find a way to share a city that was big enough for both of them. The newspapers loved it. Gang war rages in Chicago. Capone and Romano trade bullets. They wrote about it like it was a sporting event, keeping score of the dead like they were keeping track of a baseball season. But the people who lived through it knew better. They knew that every bullet fired in anger created more anger. Every betrayal led to another betrayal. Every act of revenge demanded another act of revenge. By 1932, both men were tired. The war had cost them money, territory, loyal men, and peace of mind. Still, neither man knew how to stop. When you build your reputation on strength, admitting you want peace looks like weakness. And in their world, weakness was fatal. Vincent Romano made his mistake on February 14th, 1932. But it wasn't the kind of mistake anyone expected. Vincent Romano died the way he had lived, violently and alone. It wasn't Al Capone who killed him. It wasn't even anyone connected to Capone. Romano's death came from within his own organization, from men who had grown tired of his unpredictable rages, his constant demands for more violence, his refusal to consider that there might be ways to resolve conflicts other than bloodshed. Romano's lieutenant, a man named Carlo Benedetti, had been quietly negotiating with some of the smaller families on the north side, not to betray Romano, but to find a way to make peace, to find a way for everyone to make money without constantly looking over their shoulders. When Romano found out about the meetings, he saw it as the ultimate betrayal, not just of him personally, but of everything he believed in. In Romano's mind, any talk of peace was surrender. Any negotiation was weakness. He called Benedetti to a meeting on February 14th, Valentine's Day. Ironic, considering what happened next. Romano accused Benedetti of treachery. He screamed about loyalty, about honor, about what happened to men who betrayed their families. And then, he pulled out the knife that had given him his nickname. But Benedetti wasn't alone that night. He had brought 2 other men, both of whom had grown equally tired of Romano's leadership, both of whom had lost friends and family members in Romano's endless war. The fight was brief and brutal. When it was over, Vincent, the Knife Romano, was dead at 34 years old, bleeding out on the floor of a warehouse that had once been the symbol of his power. Benedetti and his men dumped the body in Lake Michigan and disappeared. By morning, they were on trains heading to Detroit, Cleveland, New York, anywhere that wasn't Chicago. Romano's organization crumbled within hours. Without his iron will holding it together, without his reputation for ruthless violence keeping enemies at bay, the men who had worked for him scattered like leaves in the wind. Some tried to join other families. Some left Chicago entirely. A few tried to continue operating independently. But without Romano's protection and connections, they were easy targets for their competitors. Within a week, the Romano family's territory was being divided up among the remaining organizations. Their speakeasies were taken over, their gambling operations absorbed, their protection rackets redistributed. It was exactly the kind of power vacuum that men like Al Capone had learned to exploit quickly and efficiently. But Vincent Romano hadn't just been a gangster. He had also been a husband and a father. Rosa Romano was 31 years old when her husband died. She was also 5 months pregnant with their 4th child. She had married Vincent when she was 19, drawn to his confidence, his ambition, his absolute certainty that he could conquer the world. In the early years, when he was building his organization, when every day brought new victories and new territories, it had felt like being married to a king. But kings, as Rosa learned, rule from very lonely thrones. As Vincent became more consumed by his war with Capone, as he became more paranoid, more violent, more isolated, Rosa found herself raising their children essentially alone. Vincent would come home after midnight, sometimes not for days. When he was there, he was distracted, suspicious, always listening for sounds that might mean danger. Their children, Michael 14, Sophia 12, and little Anthony 8, learned not to make noise when Papa was home. They learned not to ask questions about his work. They learned that showing fear or weakness around their father was a mistake. Rosa tried to create some normalcy for them. She cooked family dinners that Vincent rarely attended. She helped with homework at a kitchen table where Vincent cleaned his guns. She tucked them into beds in a house where the windows were always curtained and the doors always locked. She knew what Vincent did for a living. She knew about the violence, the illegal businesses, the constant danger. But she also knew that he provided for them, that their children had clothes and food and a warm place to sleep, that other families in the neighborhood looked at them with a mixture of fear and envy. Until February 15th, 1932, the day she woke up and Vincent wasn't there. At first, she wasn't worried. Vincent often disappeared for days when business was particularly dangerous. But by evening, when none of his usual associates had seen him, When the phone calls she made to his usual haunts went unanswered, Rosa began to understand that something was very wrong. The truth came from an unexpected source. Carlo Benedetti's wife, Elena, appeared at Rosa's door at midnight. Elena looked terrified, exhausted, like a woman who had been running from something terrible. "Rosa, you need to know," Elena said. "Vincent is dead. Carlo killed him. They're all running. Everyone's running." The words hit Rosa like physical blows. Vincent, dead. The organization, gone. The men who had protected them, scattered. And suddenly, Rosa Romano realized that she was completely alone in a very dangerous world. Within 48 hours, Rosa's world collapsed completely. Vincent had been the center of everything: the money, the protection, the connections that kept their families safe and fed. Without him, Rosa discovered how quickly a comfortable life could become a desperate one. The money stopped coming immediately. Vincent had never shared financial details with Rosa. She knew there was money, but she didn't know where it was kept, which banks it was in, or who controlled it now that Vincent was gone. The men who might have known were either dead or running for their lives. The house they lived in wasn't owned by Vincent. It was owned by the organization, and the organization no longer existed. The new landlords, men connected to rival families, made it clear that the Romano family was no longer welcome. Even worse, Rosa began to understand that Vincent's enemies might see his family as targets. In their world, the sins of the father could easily be visited upon the children. As long as Rosa and her children remained in Chicago, they would be reminders of Vincent Romano's war, symbols of a conflict that others might want to finish. She tried to find work, but Vincent's reputation followed her. Legitimate businesses wouldn't hire the widow of a notorious gangster. Even the neighborhoods where Vincent had once been respected were now controlled by his enemies. By February 20th, Rosa had sold everything of value they owned. By February 25th, she was behind on rent with no way to catch up. By February 28th, the landlord had given her an ultimatum: pay what she owed by midnight or find somewhere else to live. Rosa Romano had $14 to her name, 3 children to feed, and another child growing inside her. It was 1932, in the middle of the Great Depression, in a city that had just watched her husband's violent world tear itself apart. She sat at her kitchen table that night, staring at a piece of paper with a telephone number written on it, a number that Elena Benedetti had given her before fleeing Chicago. "If things get really bad," Elena had said, "if you have nowhere else to turn, this might be your only choice." It was Al Capone's private telephone number. Rosa stared at that number for 3 hours. This was the man who had been her husband's greatest enemy, the man Vincent had spent 5 years trying to destroy, the man who, by all rights, should have been celebrating her family's downfall. She remembered the things Vincent had said about Capone. "He's a snake, Rosa. Don't let his smooth talk fool you. He destroys families, ruins lives, corrupts everything he touches." She remembered Vincent coming home after particularly violent encounters, his clothes torn, his knuckles bloody, his eyes wild with the kind of rage that comes from knowing you've nearly died. "Capone thinks he owns this city," Vincent would say, pacing their kitchen like a caged animal. "He thinks his money and his politicians make him untouchable. But I'll show him what real power looks like. I'll show him what happens when you cross the Romano family." But now Vincent was gone. His power was gone. His protection was gone. And Rosa was left with 3 children, another on the way, and the terrible irony that the only person in Chicago with the power to help them was the man her husband had tried to destroy. She thought about her children, sleeping in the next room. Michael, who was trying so hard to be brave, who had started talking about quitting school to find work. Sophia, who had stopped smiling, who flinched every time someone knocked on the door. Little Anthony, who still asked when Papa was coming home, who didn't understand why they had to whisper all the time now. They deserved better than this. They deserved better than to pay the price for their father's war. But it was also the only number she had left to call. At 2 a.m. on March 1st, 1932, Rosa Romano picked up the telephone and dialed a number she had never thought she would use. The phone rang twice before a man's voice answered. Not Al Capone, one of his people, someone whose job it was to screen calls at all hours of the night. Yeah? I need to speak with Al Capone. Rosa's voice was barely above a whisper. Who's calling? Rosa closed her eyes. Once she said her name, there would be no going back. Everyone would know that Vincent Romano's widow had called Al Capone for help. It would be the final admission that her husband's war had been lost, that his family needed mercy from the man he had tried to destroy. This is Rosa Romano. The silence on the other end lasted so long that Rosa wondered if the man had hung up. Finally, he spoke again, his voice more careful now. Hold on. Rosa could hear muffled voices, footsteps, the sound of doors opening and closing. She waited, her heart pounding, her children sleeping in the next room, unaware that their mother was about to either save or doom their family with a single conversation. After what felt like forever, a different voice came on the line, deeper, calmer, with the slight accent that everyone in Chicago recognized. Mrs. Romano, this is Al Capone. Mr. Capone. Rosa had rehearsed what she would say, but now, hearing his voice, the words left her. This was the man her husband had called a monster, a threat to everything decent, but he sounded ordinary. Tired, like a man who had been woken up in the middle of the night, but not angry about it. There was a silence that stretched between them, filled with 5 years of warfare, violence, and loss. Rosa could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the clock ticking on the kitchen wall, could hear her children's quiet breathing from the next room. I know about Vincent, Capone said quietly. I heard what happened. I'm sorry for your loss. The kindness in his voice broke something inside Rosa. She had expected many things from this conversation. Anger, mockery, suspicion, demands, but not sympathy. Not from this man. You're sorry? The words came out before she could stop them. You hated him. He tried to kill you. Why would you be sorry? Capone's response came slowly, thoughtfully. Mrs. Romano, your husband and I had our differences, serious differences, but I never hated him. I understood him. He was trying to protect his family, his territory, his way of life. I can't fault a man for that. Rosa began to cry, not quietly, but with the deep, wrenching sobs of someone who had been holding back too much for too long. The grief for Vincent, the fear for her children, the exhaustion of trying to be strong when everything was falling apart around her. Capone waited patiently while she composed herself. He didn't rush her, didn't demand she explain herself, didn't make her feel foolish for breaking down. He just waited, like a man who understood grief and wasn't afraid of it. Mrs. Romano, where are you right now? Are you safe? We're at home, but not for long. They want us out by midnight tomorrow. I don't have anywhere else to go. What do you need? The question was simple, direct, without judgment. Rosa had expected anger, suspicion, demands to know why she thought she deserved help from her husband's enemy. Instead, Capone was asking what she needed, like her desperation was reason enough to help. I need a place for my children to sleep. I need time to figure out what comes next. She paused, gathering courage. I need someone to protect them, Mr. Capone. Vincent made enemies. I'm afraid those enemies might come for us. Capone was quiet for a moment. Rosa could hear him breathing, thinking, weighing decisions that she couldn't imagine. Mrs. Romano, I want you to listen to me carefully. In 3 hours, a man named Tony Lombardo will knock on your door. He's one of my people, and you can trust him completely. He's going to take you and your children somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere you can rest without worrying about anything else. Mr. Capone, I don't have any money. I can't pay you back. I don't know what Vincent might have owed you, but I can't. You don't owe me anything. Capone interrupted gently. Vincent and I had our differences, but that has nothing to do with you or your children. They didn't choose this war, and they shouldn't suffer for it. Rosa was crying again, but quietly now, tears of relief rather than despair. Why are you helping me? She asked. Capone was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful, like a man trying to explain something he was still figuring out himself. Because, Mrs. Romano, real strength isn't about crushing your enemies. It's about knowing when to save them. At 5 a.m., on March 1st, 1932, Tony Lombardo knocked on Rosa Romano's door. Lombardo was not what Rosa had expected. He was a small, neat man in his 40s, wearing a simple suit and carrying a doctor's bag. His eyes were kind, his manner gentle, like someone's favorite uncle rather than a member of Al Capone's organization. Mrs. Romano, I'm Tony Lombardo. Mr. Capone sent me. Rosa had spent the 3 hours since the phone call packing what few belongings they could carry and trying to explain to her children that they were going on an unexpected trip. Michael, the 14-year-old, understood more than he let on. Sophia and Anthony were confused but trusting, willing to follow their mother anywhere as long as they stayed together. Lombardo looked around the small apartment, taking in the packed suitcases, the frightened faces of the children, Rosa's obvious exhaustion and anxiety. The car is outside, he said softly. But before we go, Mr. Capone wanted me to give you this. He handed Rosa an envelope. Inside was more money than she had ever seen in one place. Enough to last her family months, maybe a year, if they were careful. Mr. Capone said this isn't charity, Lombardo explained. He said it's what Vincent would have wanted for his family if he'd had the chance to provide it. The drive across Chicago took them through neighborhoods Rosa had never seen, past landmarks that looked different in the early morning light. Lombardo chatted quietly with the children, asking about school, about their favorite games, treating them like precious cargo rather than the family of a former enemy. They arrived at a house in a quiet residential neighborhood on the south side. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, warm, and safe. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with food already stocked, a living room with comfortable furniture and books on the shelves. The house smelled like coffee and fresh bread. There were flowers in vases, clean towels in the bathrooms, children's clothes in appropriate sizes laid out on the beds. Someone had thought of everything, had anticipated every need a frightened family might have. Rosa stood in the doorway of the largest bedroom and realized that it had been prepared specifically for her. There was a rocking chair by the window, the kind expectant mothers use. There were books on pregnancy and child care on the nightstand. There was even a small bassinet in the corner, ready and waiting for the baby she carried. Someone, Al Capone, had thought not just about immediate shelter, but about the months ahead. About the fact that she would need a place to recover after giving birth, a safe space to raise her newborn, a home where her children could heal from the trauma of losing their father and their old life. This is yours for as long as you need it, Lombardo told Rosa. The rent is taken care of. The utilities are taken care of. There's a doctor nearby who will look after you during your pregnancy. No questions asked. The children can enroll in the local school under whatever names you think are safest. He handed her a folder filled with documents, birth certificates with new names, school enrollment forms already partially filled out, even a letter of recommendation for Rosa from a fictional previous employer. Mr. Capone thought you might want to start fresh, Lombardo explained. New names, new history, new life, but that's up to you. If you prefer to keep your real names, that's fine too. Either way, you'll be protected. Rosa looked around the house, their house, and felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: security. The knowledge that her children would sleep safely that night and the night after, and for however many nights it took her to figure out what came next. "There's one more thing," Lombardo said. He handed her a card with a telephone number written on it. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, you call this number, day or night." Mr. Capone's instructions were very clear. The Romano family is under his protection now. That means if anyone bothers you, if anyone threatens you, if anyone even makes you feel uncomfortable, you call that number. Mr. Capone considers you family now. The word family hit Rosa like a physical force. Vincent's family was gone, scattered or dead. Her own family lived back in Italy and hadn't spoken to her since she married Vincent. For weeks, she had felt utterly alone in the world. But here was Al Capone, her husband's enemy, telling her that she and her children were now part of his family, protected, cared for, valued. After Lombardo left, Rosa sat in her new kitchen with her children around her, eating breakfast in a house that Al Capone, her husband's greatest enemy, had provided for them. Michael, old enough to understand the implications, looked at his mother with questions in his eyes. "Mama, why is he helping us? After what Papa did?" Rosa looked at her eldest son, this boy who was trying so hard to be the man of the family, and tried to find words for something she was still trying to understand herself. "I think, Michael, that Mr. Capone understands something your father never did. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose to be kind instead of cruel." The Romano family lived in that house for 2 years. Rosa gave birth to her daughter, Elena, in a safe hospital, with the best doctors Al Capone's money could buy. The children attended school, made friends, learned that the world could be a place where they didn't have to be afraid. Rosa found work as a seamstress, then as a manager at a small clothing store. Slowly, carefully, she built a new life for her family, one that had nothing to do with the violence that had defined Vincent's world. Al Capone never asked for anything in return. He never visited, never called, never made the Romano family feel indebted or obligated. The protection he offered was absolute and unconditional. In 1934, when Capone was finally convicted and sent to federal prison, Rosa received one last visit from Tony Lombardo. "Mr. Capone wanted me to tell you that his arrangements for your family will continue regardless of what happens to him." Lombardo explained, "You'll always be protected. Your children will always be safe." "Please tell him," Rosa said, "that we pray for him every night, that we'll never forget what he did for us." Rosa Romano lived to be 87 years old. Her children grew up to become a teacher, a doctor, and a small business owner. None of them ever had any involvement with organized crime. They became exactly the kind of citizens that Vincent Romano, in his own way, had wanted them to be. But they never forgot the lesson Al Capone taught them in February 1932. Michael Romano became Dr. Michael Romano, a pediatrician who spent his career caring for poor children in Chicago's South Side. When people asked him why he chose to work in such a difficult area for such little money, he would think of a February night when he was 14 years old, and a stranger's kindness saved his family. Sofia Romano became Sofia Romano Martinez, an elementary school teacher who specialized in helping children from troubled families. She would often tell her students that everyone deserves a second chance, that kindness is stronger than hatred, that the most important lesson anyone can learn is when to offer mercy instead of seeking revenge. Anthony Romano, who had been only 8 years old when his father died, grew up to own a small restaurant in Little Italy. Above the bar, he kept a framed photograph of Al Capone, not the famous mugshot, but a candid picture of Capone with his own family, looking like any other father with his children. When customers asked about the photograph, Anthony would simply say, "That's the man who taught me what real strength looks like." Elena Romano, the daughter born after Vincent's death, became a social worker who devoted her life to helping families in crisis. She never knew her father, but she grew up hearing stories about the night Al Capone chose mercy over vengeance, kindness over cruelty. When Al Capone died in 1947, All 4 Romano children attended his funeral. They stood in the back, 3 adults and a teenager, silently paying their respects to the man who had given them a future their father's enemy had no obligation to provide. Real strength isn't about overpowering your enemies. It's about having the power to destroy someone and choosing instead to save them. True victory isn't about winning a war. It's about ending one. And sometimes, the most important battle you can fight is the one against your own desire for revenge. Al Capone had every reason to let the Romano family suffer. Vincent had tried to destroy him, had killed his friends, had caused him years of pain and loss. Justice, as most people understood it, would have been letting Vincent's children pay for their father's sins. But Capone chose mercy instead. He chose to see Rosa's children not as extensions of his enemy, but as innocents who deserved protection. He chose to end the cycle of violence rather than perpetuate it. And in doing so, he discovered something that all his money and power and fear had never given him: the peace that comes from choosing compassion over conquest. Years later, when Capone was in prison, suffering from the syphilis that would eventually kill him, he would sometimes receive letters from Rosa Romano. She would update him on the children's progress in school, share small triumphs and everyday joys, remind him that his kindness had created something beautiful in the world. One letter, written in 1940, said simply, "Mr. Capone, Michael graduated from high school today. He's going to college to become a doctor. Sophia is engaged to a good man who makes her laugh. Anthony learned to read this year and devours every book he can find. Elena took her first steps last week. They are all healthy, all happy, all safe. They are all living proof that mercy is more powerful than revenge. We pray for you every day, and will never forget what you did for us. With eternal gratitude, the Romano family." That phone call at 2 a.m. changed 2 families forever. It gave the Romano family a future they never could have imagined. And it gave Al Capone something even more valuable: the knowledge that real strength lies not in crushing those who are down, but in lifting them up. The night Al Capone saved his biggest enemy's family, he learned what true power actually means: not the ability to hurt, but the ability to heal; not the strength to destroy, but the wisdom to preserve. In a world built on revenge and retribution, on the idea that weakness must be punished and strength must dominate, Capone chose something different. He chose to see beyond the war to the family caught in its crossfire. That choice, made in the quiet hours of a February morning, when no one was watching, and no one would have blamed him for walking away, reveals more about the man Al Capone really was than all the headlines and legends that followed him. Sometimes, the measure of a man isn't what he does to his enemies when he has the power to destroy them. It's what he chooses to do when he has the power to save them instead. And sometimes, salvation is the most revolutionary act of all.